before we begin, close your eyes. Take a slow breath in and let it out even more slowly. Feel the weight of your body sinking into whatever surface is beneath you, your shoulders, your back, your legs. Let gravity do its work. You don't need to hold anything up right now. Tonight, we are going somewhere together. Not far away in distance, but impossibly far away in time. We are going back 12,000 years. Before the pyramids, before writing, before cities, before farming, before almost everything we think of when we think of human civilization. We are going to a moment when the world as humans knew it ended. Not in fire, not in darkness, but in water. Rising, unstoppable, world-changing water. And here is the most remarkable thing about tonight's story. It is not a myth. It is not a legend passed down to frighten children. It is real. The evidence is in the ocean floor. It is in the ice cores of Greenland and Antarctica. It is in the sediment layers beneath ancient lakes. It is in the DNA of populations separated by thousands of miles of open ocean. The Great Flood happened, not exactly as any single tradition describes it, but something so catastrophic, so world-altering, that virtually every culture on Earth remembers it in their own language, in their own images, in their own sacred stories. Tonight, we find out what actually happened. Breathe slowly, let the day go, and let me take you back to the edge of the ice, the world before the flood, a different Earth. Imagine standing on a hillside and looking out at a landscape you would not recognize. The year is approximately 14,000 BC. We are in what will one day be called Europe, but that name does not exist yet. No name exists yet for anything. There are only landscapes, only seasons, only the slow turning of a world still locked in the grip of the last great ice age. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not the kind of cold you feel on a winter morning when you step outside. Something deeper. Something that has been here for so long it feels like the natural state of things. The air is dry and sharp. Your breath fogs instantly. The second thing you notice is the ice. To the north, and it is not that far north from where you stand, a wall of ice rises on the horizon. Not a glacier in the sense we might picture one today, something far more immense. A continental ice sheet, kilometers thick in places, covering what is now Scandinavia. Britain, northern Germany, Canada, and much of the northern United States. This is the Laurentide ice sheet in the west and the Fennoscandian ice sheet in the east, together along with ice caps in Antarctica and Greenland. They have locked away so much of the world's water that the global sea level is approximately 120 meters lower than it is today. 120 meters. Let that settle for a moment. The English Channel between Britain and France does not exist. Britain is not an island. You can walk from London to Amsterdam. You can walk from Siberia to Alaska. Between the islands of Southeast Asia, vast plains of dry land connect what are now separated archipelagos. The world is bigger, harder, colder, and full of creatures we would barely recognize. Woolly mammoths move in herds across the northern steppes. Cave lions hunt in what will one day be France and Germany. Giant ground sloths browse the forests of the Americas. Short-faced bears, larger than any bear alive today, dominate the North American interior. And humans, small, scattered, Extraordinarily adaptable bands of Homo sapiens living across every continent except Antarctica. They have fire, they have language. They have art. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira are being made around this time. Images of such beauty and skill that they astonish us still. These people are not primitive in any meaningful sense of the word. They are intelligent, creative, socially complex. They have mapped the stars. They understand the seasons. They know their landscape with an intimacy that no modern human can match. They have also, in something new, something that will change everything, they have begun to settle down. The first settlements along coastlines, along river valleys, near the shores of lakes. Some human groups have begun to stay in one place for longer than hunting and gathering usually allows. Why here? Why now? Because the end of the Ice Age, even in its early stages, is making certain environments extraordinarily productive. The coastlines, in particular, where rivers meet the sea, where tidal flats teem with shellfish, where fish return in great seasonal runs, these places can support more people than the open steppe. In what is today the Middle East, in a region called the Fertile Crescent, something remarkable is beginning. People are starting to tend wild plants. Not quite farming yet, that is still a few thousand years away, but something between pure foraging and true agriculture. A careful, intimate relationship with the land. In what is today Japan, a culture called Jomon is making pottery, among the oldest pottery in the world, and settling in semi-permanent villages along the coast. Along the shores of the Black Sea, which at this time is not connected to the Mediterranean but is instead a vast freshwater lake. Sitting well below the level of the ocean, communities have established themselves. They fish, they hunt, they treat, they build. They have no idea what is coming. Not them do. Because high above them, in the mountains, in the vast frozen plains of the north, something has already begun. Something slow, at first. Something that will take thousands of years to complete. But something utterly, catastrophically unstoppable. The ice is beginning to melt. Why the ice began to melt? Let your breathing slow a little more. Feel the heaviness of sleep beginning to gather at the edges of your thoughts. We are going somewhere together, slowly, through deep time. The earth moves in cycles. Long, slow cycles that operate on timescales so vast they make human history look like a single afternoon. One of these cycles is called the Milankovitch cycle, named after a Serbian scientist who worked it out in the early 20th century. It describes how the Earth's orbit around the Sun shifts very slowly over tens of thousands of years. The tilt of the Earth changes, the shape of the orbit changes, and as these things change, the amount of sunlight reaching different parts of the Earth changes with them. Around 20,000 years ago, the orbital configuration was such that the northern hemisphere received less summer sunlight than it does today. That slight reduction was enough to allow ice to accumulate year after year, century after century, until the vast ice sheets of the last glacial maximum were in place. But the cycle continued turning, and by around 15,000 years ago the configuration had shifted. The northern hemisphere was receiving more summer sunlight. Not dramatically more, not instantly more, but consistently, year after year, just enough more that the ice began slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, to retreat. Summer temperatures crept upward by fractions of a degree. The southern edges of the ice sheets began to soften. Meltwater rivers appeared where there had been only frozen silence. It was the beginning of the end of the Ice Age. And the beginning of something else. something that would unfold over the next 8,000 years in a series of pulses, some gradual, some catastrophically sudden until the world we recognize today finally emerged. But not before the flood. The meltwater pulses, water locked in ice. Before we go further, I want you to truly feel the scale of what was locked inside those ice sheets. The Laurentide ice sheet, the one that covered most of Canada and the northern United States, contained approximately 25 million cubic kilometers of ice. 25 million cubic kilometers. If you melted all of that ice and spread the water evenly across the world's oceans, it would raise sea level by more than 60 meters on its own. And the Fennoscandian sheet, the Antarctic ice cap, the smaller ice caps in Iceland, the Alps, the Himalayas, all melting, all releasing water that had been locked away for tens of thousands of years. This is where it came from. The flood waters that reshaped the world, not rain, though rain played a role. Not rivers, though rivers carried the melt. The water came from ice. Ancient ice storing ancient precipitation, releasing it all back into the ocean over a period of thousands of years. But not evenly, not gradually. There were pulses. Meltwater Pulse 1A. Around 14,200 years ago, something happened that geologists call Meltwater Pulse 1A. The precise trigger is still debated. Perhaps a warming event destabilized a particularly large section of ice. Perhaps a massive ice shelf collapsed into the ocean, releasing the glaciers behind it to flow more freely. Perhaps it was a combination of factors that reached a tipping point simultaneously. Whatever the cause, the result is recorded in coral reefs around the world. Coral that grows at very specific depths, leaving a chemical record of sea level in its skeleton. And that record shows something extraordinary. In the space of approximately 500 years, which is an eye blink in geological time, global sea level rose by somewhere between 16 and 25 meters. 25 meters in 500 years. That is 5 centimeters per year, every year. For 5 centuries. To put it in terms that feel more immediate, in a single human lifetime of 80 years, the sea would rise for meters. Your grandchildren would be born into a world where the coastline had moved kilometers. Inland from where it was when you were a child. For the people living on those coastlines, the settlements, the fishing villages, the communities that had built their lives at the edge of the productive, generous sea, this was not a slow inconvenience. This was catastrophe on an incomprehensible scale. The villages flooded, then the land behind them flooded. Then that land flooded too, and the water kept rising. What it felt like. Let me take you somewhere specific. A village on the coast of what is today the North Sea, but 12,000 years ago is dry land. A plain called Doggerland, stretching between Britain and what is now the Netherlands and Denmark. It is a rich, fertile, beautiful landscape. Rivers wind through it. Forests of birch and pine cover the higher ground. Wetlands teem with waterfowl. The hunting is good. The fishing is extraordinary. People have lived here for thousands of years. You are one of them. Your family has been here for generations, as far back as anyone's memory reaches. Your grandparents are buried here. The paths between the hunting grounds and the camp are worn smooth by the feet of your ancestors. And the sea has always been there, to the west, to the north. A presence, a boundary, a source of food and wonder. But lately, it has been closer. Not dramatically closer, not overnight. But the elders have noticed the children have noticed. The beach where your grandfather taught your mother to fish, it is underwater now. The tidal flats where you collected shellfish last summer, they are gone. The water is rising, slowly enough that you can still convince yourself it might stop. Slowly enough that each individual step is bearable, but relentlessly. Season by season. And one day, perhaps in your lifetime, perhaps in your children's, Doggerland will be gone, swallowed by the North Sea, the entire landscape, the entire world that your people knew, buried under cold grey water. All that will remain are the bones of the land. And occasionally, when fishing trawlers drag their nets across the floor of the North Sea even today, they pull up bones and tools and the preserved remains of that lost world. Doggerland, the Atlantis of the North. Real and really gone. The Younger Dryas interruption. Now breathe slowly. Let the water drain away from your imagination. Let the land rise again, briefly. Because the story of the Ice Age's end is not a simple, straight line from cold to warm, from ice to flood. It has interruptions, and one of them is so dramatic, so sudden, so mysterious in its cause, that scientists who study it still shake their heads in disbelief. Around 12,900 years ago, something happened that seems almost impossible. The warming stopped. Not gradually. Not over centuries. In perhaps a decade, possibly less temperatures across the northern hemisphere plummeted. Ice cores from Greenland show the change clearly. Within 50 years, temperatures dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius. Glaciers that had been retreating began to advance again. The forests that had been creeping northward retreated south. The animals that had followed the warming north died or fled. This event is called the Younger Dryas. It lasted approximately 1,200 years. And it remains one of the most debated events in all of paleoclimatology. What caused it? The leading theory involves the ocean circulation system, what scientists call the thermaline circulation, or sometimes the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. You might know it better as the Gulf Stream, though it is far more complex than that simple name suggests. This circulation system works like a giant conveyor belt. Warm water flows north along the surface, warming Europe and the eastern coast of North America. As it reaches the far north, it cools, becomes denser, and sinks to the ocean floor, flowing back south as deep, cold water. This circulation is what keeps northern Europe habitable. Without it, Britain and Norway would have climates more like Alaska. And the theory goes like this: as the ice sheets melted, they released enormous quantities of cold, fresh meltwater into the North Atlantic. This freshwater, lighter than saltwater, floated on the surface, preventing the warm surface water from sinking. The conveyor belt slowed, or stopped entirely. And without the warm water flowing north, Europe and the North Atlantic froze again. For 1,2 years. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the circulation started again, and the warming resumed. Even more dramatically than before. The Great Meltwater Events. Meltwater Pulse 1b and the Final Collapse. Around 11,500 years ago, the Younger Dryas ended abruptly, violently, in geological terms. Ice cores show that temperatures in Greenland rose by 10 degrees Celsius in the space of about 50 years. The forests surged northward again. The ice retreated. And the meltwater, which had been temporarily restrained, began to flood into the oceans once more. This is the period that corresponds most closely to what so many cultures remember as the Great Flood, the most dramatic phase of sea level rise, the most rapid transformation of coastlines, The most catastrophic displacement of coastal peoples. Sea levels were rising at their fastest rates during this period. Coastlines that had been stable for centuries were suddenly within a sign unrecognizable. Consider what this means for the people living through it. Your parents told you the sea was there at that distance. Your grandparents confirmed it. The knowledge of where the land ended and the water began was as settled and certain as the rising of the sun. And then, within your own lifetime, the sea came for you. The Black Sea flood. Of all the specific flood events associated with this period, one stands out for the vividness of the evidence and the directness of its potential connection to the flood myths of the ancient Near East. The Black Sea flood hypothesis. Before approximately 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea was not connected to the Mediterranean. It was a large, enclosed freshwater lake or perhaps a brackish inland sea sitting well below the level of the Mediterranean. Around it, in the fertile river valleys and along the productive shorelines, substantial communities had established themselves. These may have been among the earliest agricultural communities in the world, proto-farmers, tending the first cultivated crops, raising the first domesticated animals. The Mediterranean, meanwhile, was rising. The ice sheets were still melting. Sea level was still climbing. And at some point around 7,600 years ago, the water level in the Mediterranean reached a critical point. The Bosphorus, the narrow strait connecting the Mediterranean and Black Sea systems, was breached. What happened next is described by geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, who first proposed this hypothesis in the 1990s in terms that are almost impossible to comprehend. The Mediterranean water came through the Bosphorus with a force 200 times greater than Niagara Falls, a roaring, churning torrent of salt water pouring down into the freshwater lake below. The Black Sea rose by as much as 15 centimeters per day during the peak of the flooding. The communities around its shores, the farmers, the fishermen, the villages that had stood for generations were overwhelmed. Not in an instant, but fast enough that there was no stopping it. Fast enough that you could watch your village disappear in the course of a season. The survivors fled in every direction. North into the steppes, west into Europe, east toward Central Asia, south toward the Middle East. And they carried their story with them. The stories we carry. Let yourself drift a little now. Let the images float, the rising water, the fleeing people, the villages swallowed by the advancing sea. Let them be gentle images held at a safe distance. You are here, warm and dry and safe. The survivors of these catastrophic floods, and there were many floods in many places, over the course of thousands of years, did what humans have always done with experiences too large and too overwhelming to simply file away as memory. They turned them into story. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written texts in the world, from ancient Mesopotamia, contains a flood story that predates the biblical account of Noah by at least 1,000 years. In it, a man called Utnapishtim is warned by the gods of an impending flood. He builds a boat. He takes animals and his family aboard. The flood comes, vast and terrible. The waters recede. The boat comes to rest on a mountain. A bird is sent out to find dry land. The parallels to Noah are unmistakable, because they are the same story. Or rather, they are different expressions of the same memory, a memory so old and so powerful that it survived the invention of writing, the rise and fall of empires, and the passage of thousands of years to reach us still. Similar stories exist in Hindu scripture, the story of Manu and the great fish. In Greek mythology, the story of Deucalion. Among the indigenous peoples of North America, South America, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. Among the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. In the myths of China and Southeast Asia. Every culture on Earth that has a tradition old enough to reach back 12,000 years has a flood story, not because they all made up the same story independently, but because the flood happened, the evidence in the earth, what the science tells us. I want to pause our journey for a moment and walk through the evidence, not because you need to remember it, not because it will be on any test, but because there is something deeply comforting, I think, in knowing that the story we are telling is real, that the science and the myth are pointing at the same truth. The first line of evidence is sea level data, by analyzing coral reefs at various depths around the world, and by studying the sediment layers on continental shelves. Scientists have reconstructed a detailed picture of how sea levels changed since the last glacial maximum. The record is clear. Between 20,000 years ago and 7,000 years ago, global sea level rose by approximately 120 meters. That rise was not smooth and gradual. It was punctuated by sharp pulses, the most dramatic of which occurred between 14,000 and 7,000 years ago. The second line of evidence is the drowned landscapes around the world. When divers and submersible cameras explore the shallow continental shelves, the areas just beyond current coastlines, they find things that should not be underwater: stone tools, animal bones, human structures. Evidence of life on land, now sitting under tens of meters of ocean. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Comhat, sonar has revealed what appears to be the remains of a large settlement sitting 40 meters below the current sea surface. Off the coast of Japan, off the coast of Florida, along the coastlines of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, the drowned evidence of the pre-flood world. The third line of evidence is sediment layers. When geologists drill cores from lake beds and ocean floors, they find, at depths corresponding to the right time period, layers of distinctive sediment carried there by catastrophic floods, layers that are abrupt, that appear suddenly in the record, that represent not gradual deposition but violent, rapid events. The fourth line of evidence, and perhaps the most personal, is genetic. The migrations caused by the rising seas left traces in the DNA of human populations. The sudden dispersal of people away from the Black Sea region, for example, appears to correlate with the spread of certain genetic lineages into Europe and Central Asia. The story of the flood is written not just in rock and sediment, but in our own cells. Doggerland, the lost world. Let me take you back to Doggerland, that drowned world beneath the North Sea. We know it existed because of what comes up in fishing nets. Fishermen working those waters have, for centuries, occasionally pulled up strange things alongside their catch. Bones of woolly mammoths and aurochs, antlers of giant deer, and occasionally, most poignantly, tools, worked flint, harpoon points. Once, a piece of a human skull. In recent decades, scientists have used seismic data and sediment cores to map what Doggerland actually looked like. And what they have found is remarkable. Not a barren, featureless plain, but a rich and varied landscape. River systems, lakes, marshlands, coastal estuaries, hill country, perhaps even a large central lake. By some estimates, Doggerland at its maximum extent was larger than the United Kingdom, a substantial landmass with substantial human populations living on it. All of it is gone now, covered by 20 to 40 meters of North Sea water. The final inundation of Doggerland may have occurred around 8,200 years ago, triggered or accelerated by a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, an event called the Storegga Slide, which generated a tsunami that swept across the remaining exposed land. In a single day, or perhaps a few days, whatever remained of Doggerland above water was swept away. The last people of Doggerland, if any still remained, had nowhere to go but east, to the mainland of Europe, or west, to the highlands of Britain. They brought their stories with them, and perhaps, just perhaps, those stories became part of the deep cultural memory that eventually, thousands of years later, became the flood myths of the ancient world. Part 5, The World After the Flood. New World. By around 7,000 years ago, the most dramatic phase of sea level rise was over. The great ice sheets had largely melted. The Laurentide ice sheet, that vast, kilometre-thick blanket of ice that had covered most of Canada, was gone or nearly so. Only Greenland and Antarctica retained their ice caps, and they still do. The world that emerged from the flood period looked, broadly, like the world we know today. The English Channel existed. The North Sea covered Doggerland. The Black Sea was connected to the Mediterranean. The coastlines of India, Southeast Asia, and Australia had retreated to roughly their current positions. But for the people who lived through it, or whose grandparents and great-grandparents had lived through the worst of it, the memory remained. And something else happened too. Something that would change human civilization forever. The end of the Ice Age and the settling of the coastlines created conditions that were, in some crucial ways, more favorable for certain kinds of human activity than the Ice Age world had been. The Fertile Crescent, that arc of productive land across what is today Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, became warmer and wetter. The wild ancestors of wheat and barley and lentils thrived in these conditions, and the people who had been displaced from their old coastal homelands, who had been forced to move inland, who had been pushed together into new territories, they were perhaps more motivated than ever to find new ways to produce food reliably. Agriculture, true, systematic agriculture, appears in the archaeological record right around this time, 9,500 to 10,000 years ago. The flood, in a very real sense, may have helped create the rise of civilization, and farming created everything else. When you can produce food reliably, when you don't have to move to follow the animals or the seasons, you can stay in one place. And when you stay in one place, extraordinary things become possible. You can build permanent structures. You can accumulate possessions. You can develop specializations. This person makes pots, that person works metal, another person keeps the accounts. And you need accounts because when you have a surplus of food, more grain than your family can eat before it spoils, you need to track it, and tracking leads to numbers. And numbers lead to writing, and writing leads to everything. The first cities appear in Mesopotamia, in what is today Iraq. Around 5,500 years ago, Uruk, Eridu, your cities of tens of thousands of people, with temples and palaces and markets and drainage systems and schools and bureaucracies and poetry. Human civilization, in the full sense of the word, was born. And it was born in a landscape shaped by the flood, built by people whose ancestors had been displaced by rising water, carrying in their cultural memory and eventually encoding in their first written literature the story of what the water had done. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its flood account, was written down in Samaria in Mesopotamia approximately 4,000 years ago, but the story it records is far older. It was already ancient when it was first written, A memory preserved across generations of oral tradition, reaching back to a time when the waters were still what was lost. There is a melancholy in this story that I want to acknowledge gently. In the drowned landscapes of the world in Doggerland, in the flooded coastal plains of India and Southeast Asia, in the settlements now sitting under the Black Sea, there were people, cultures, languages, ways of seeing the world that we will never know. Some of what they knew has survived in the form of the flood myths, a kind of compressed, symbolic memory of the cataclysm itself. But the specifics of their daily lives, their music, their stories, their understanding of the world, all of it is gone. We are richer in many ways than the people of 12,000 years ago. We live longer in greater comfort with greater knowledge of the universe. We can cure diseases that would have killed them. We can cross oceans in hours that took them lifetimes. But we have also lost something. A directness of relationship with the natural world. An intimacy with the specific landscape of a specific place. A knowledge of the night sky that most of us will never have living as we do in light-polluted cities. The people of Doggerland knew their world in a way we can barely imagine. And their world is gone. Let that be held gently, not as grief, exactly, but as a kind of tenderness toward the past, toward the people who came before us, toward the fullness of human experience that stretches back so much further than our written records reach. The memory of water. Why every culture remembers. We have touched on this already, but I want to sit with it for a little longer. Why does virtually every culture on Earth have a flood story? The simple answer is because the flood happened everywhere. Rising sea levels affected every coastline on every continent. The people living on those coastlines, which before agriculture, was a very significant proportion of humanity. Since coastlines are extraordinarily productive environments, were all affected. But there is a deeper answer too. Floods are the kind of experience that human memory is built to preserve. Not in the same way that we remember what we had for breakfast or even what we did last year, but in the way that trauma is remembered viscerally, physically, as a body memory, as much as a cognitive one. An event that destroys your world, that takes everything familiar and replaces it with terrifying. Unstoppable water is the kind of event that a community will talk about for generations, will warn its children about, will encode in its most sacred stories to ensure that the knowledge survives even if the specific details are lost. The flood stories of the world are not just myths. They are emergency broadcasts from the deep past. Urgent messages sent across thousands of years of oral tradition telling us this happened. It was real. The water came, and we survived. The memory in your body. Here is something that always moves me when I think about it. The salt concentration in human blood is approximately 0.9%. The salt concentration of the ancient ocean, the ocean as it existed hundreds of millions of years ago. When our distant ancestors first developed blood as a circulatory fluid, is believed to have been similar. We carry the ocean inside us, in our blood, in the fluid surrounding every cell in our bodies. We are, in the most literal biological sense, creatures of water. We begin our lives in water, in the amniotic fluid of the womb. We are composed of water. The human body is roughly 60% water by weight. We cannot survive more than 3 days without it. Is it any wonder that water features so centrally in our myths, in our rituals, in our deepest metaphors for transformation and renewal? Baptism, the Hindu ritual of bathing in the Ganges. the mikveh of Jewish tradition, the ceremonial use of water in indigenous traditions around the world. Everywhere, water is not just a physical substance but a sacred one, a symbol of both destruction and cleansing, of ending and beginning. The flood myths are not just cultural memories of a geological event. They are expressions of something deeper, of our relationship with water itself, with the element that made us, that sustains us, that 12,000 years ago remade the world. What the water gave, the flood took much. We have acknowledged that. But let us also acknowledge what it gave. It gave us the coastlines we know, the Mediterranean as we sail it today, the North Sea that connects and separates European nations, the straits and channels and gulfs that shape the patterns of human trade and migration and warfare, and culture for the past 7,000 years. It gave us the agricultural revolution by displacing peoples into new territories, by creating the conditions that made farming not just possible but necessary. It gave us our flood myths, those extraordinary, compressed memories that connect us to our deepest past, that remind us of what our ancestors endured, that carry across thousands of years the simple, miraculous fact of survival. And it gave us, perhaps, a certain humility, a knowledge encoded in our oldest stories that the world is not fixed, that what seems permanent is not, that the land beneath our feet is, on a long enough timescale, as fluid as the water that surrounds it. The ocean rose, the world changed, peoples were displaced, civilizations were seeded. And here we are, coming back to now, stay. Let's come gently back to the present. The sea level rise that reshaped the world between 20,000 and 7,000 years ago has largely stopped. We are currently in an interglacial period, a warm phase between ice ages, and the ice sheets are at their minimum extent for this cycle. And yet, as you likely know, sea levels are rising again, not at the dramatic rates of the meltwater pulses, not meters per century, but measurably, detectably, year by year. The communities living on low-lying coasts today, in Bangladesh, in the Pacific Islands, in parts of Florida and the Netherlands and Vietnam, are facing a slow version of what the people of Doggerland faced. Their land is being reclaimed by water. Their choices are to adapt, to move, or to build barriers. We have knowledge our ancestors didn't have. We can measure what is coming. We can model it. We can plan. But the knowledge itself has a weight to it, doesn't it? A heaviness that comes from understanding, really understanding, what it means for a landscape to disappear beneath the sea, for a home to become an ocean floor. The story of 12,000 years ago is not just history. It is, in certain ways, a preview, a reminder that the relationship between land and sea is never finally settled. But tonight, that weight is not yours to carry. Tonight you are here. The land is solid beneath you. The water is at its proper distance. And you are safe. The people who remembered. I want to end our journey with the people. Not the geology, not the data. Dia as a people. Somewhere in the world, 12,000 years ago, someone watched the sea take their home. They watched the water rise day by day, week by week, until the place where they had been born, where their children had been born, was underwater. And they left. They walked inland or along the coast, carrying whatever they could, their tools, their children, their memories. And at night sitting around a fire in a new place, a place that was not home, someone told the story of the water. of what was lost, of the extraordinary fact that they were still alive. And someone listened and remembered, and told it again, and again, and again, for 12,000 years across hundreds of generations, through the rise and fall of empires and the invention of writing and the birth of every religion and philosophy and scientific tradition that has ever existed, the story survived. It became the Epic of Gilgamesh. It became Noah. It became Deucalion and Manu and the stories of 100 other traditions. And tonight it has come to you, carried across 12,000 years of human remembering. A story that belongs to all of us because all of our ancestors lived through it. You are the inheritor of the longest unbroken chain of storytelling in human history. Drift now. Let the water recede now from your imagination, slowly, gently. Let the land rise. Let it be solid and dry and safe. Let the stars come out, the same stars that the people of Doggerland looked up at. The same stars that the first farmers of the Fertile Crescent used to mark their seasons. The same stars that sailors navigated by, crossing the very seas that the flood created. They are still there, indifferent to the passage of time, burning their slow, ancient light across a distance so vast that the 12,000 years of our story is less than a single heartbeat. You are a small, warm, living thing on a very old planet. A planet that has been through fire and ice and flood and has come through all of it. Still turning, still green, still full of life. And you, the end of an unbroken chain of survivors stretching back through every catastrophe this planet has ever thrown at our species, you are allowed to rest now. The flood is 12,000 years behind you. The land is solid. The stars are out. And the night is long and quiet and yours. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts soften. Let the images drift, the ice, the rising water, the lost landscapes, the survivors walking inland with their stories. Let them become gentle and distant, like a dream you are moving toward rather than a memory you are holding. You survived the Ice Age. You survived the flood. You survived every extinction event and every volcanic winter and every catastrophe that punctuates the long story of life on this planet. Because every single one of your ancestors did. And they made it all the way to you. Sleep well. Dream of deep water and ancient stars. And when you wake, carry with you the quiet knowledge that you are part of something ancient and remarkable, and still, after everything,